Whispers spread through the entire cabin. "I will have you removed from this plane immediately." Captain Collins' cold, sharp voice sliced through the tense atmosphere. Taylor froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. Dozens of eyes were on her, some shocked, others simply curious. "What's going on?" she stammered, struggling to understand the situation. Captain Collins crossed his arms, his gaze filled with challenge. "If you don't comply with the rules, I cannot allow you to continue this flight." Taylor could feel the weight of the injustice bearing down on her. She hadn't done anything wrong. But why was it happening to her? Then, a voice from a seat further back rang out. "Hey, this is unfair." Everything began to shift from that moment on. Was this really just about a handbag? Or was there something deeper at play? If you've ever witnessed or experienced injustice, keep watching this story unfold. And don't forget to hit subscribe to help spread the message of fairness and respect. The airport was bustling with a variety of passengers, families hugging each other goodbye, and tourists rushing toward their departure gates. Among them was Taylor, a black woman with bright eyes and a radiant smile. She felt a sense of excitement as she walked toward the boarding gate. Today, she was flying to visit her sister, who lived in another city. Taylor had been looking forward to this trip for months. As she approached gate E09, she spotted the large sign reading, "Flight 204 to Chicago." She glanced at her watch. Perfect timing, she thought, with a slight flutter of anticipation in her stomach. She loved flying. The thrill of takeoff and the vast view from above always left her feeling exhilarated. Standing in line to board, Taylor couldn't stop smiling as she thought about reuniting with her sister. The boarding process began. Taylor handed her ticket to the friendly agent, who greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard," the agent said. A wave of happiness washed over Taylor as she stepped onto the plane. She found her window seat, stowed her belongings in the overhead compartment, and settled into her seat. As the plane gradually filled with passengers, Taylor couldn't help but observe those around her. There were families with young children, busy businesspeople glued to their phones, and a few who seemed visibly anxious. However, the one person who caught her attention the most was the captain of the flight. Captain Collins, a tall, white man in his 50s, walked down the aisle with a serious expression on his face. He nodded at a few passengers, but when his gaze landed on Taylor, she felt a sharp, cold stare. A chill ran down her spine. What was that about? She wondered. When the flight attendants began the safety briefing, Taylor paid close attention, but her mind kept circling back to Captain Collins. He seemed different from other pilots she had met, almost intimidating. She tried to shake off the feeling, reminding herself that she was here to enjoy the trip and reunite with her family, and that everything would be fine. As the plane taxied down the runway, Taylor felt the familiar surge of excitement rise within her. She loved the sensation of takeoff, the roar of the engines, and how the ground slowly disappeared beneath her feet. Just seconds later, Taylor's heart raced. The plane suddenly jolted violently, and she quickly gripped the armrests, her body tensing. A cold wave washed over her as the plane steadied in the air. The flight attendants began serving snacks and drinks. Taylor ordered a soda, then settled back in her seat, preparing to relax for the rest of the flight. But as she started to feel more comfortable, she realized that Captain Collins' eyes were still fixed on her from the cockpit. His face appeared grim. Suddenly, Taylor's stomach tightened, and an uneasy feeling swelled in her chest. Is something wrong? She wondered, the tension growing inside her. The flight went smoothly for a while, with passengers chatting and laughter filling the cabin. Taylor felt her anxiety starting to dissipate. She took out her phone and texted her sister, "I can't wait to see you, I'm flying so high right now." She smiled as she sent the message. But when she looked up, she saw Captain Collins walking toward her. "Is this your bag?" he asked, pointing to the bag at her feet. Taylor nodded, surprised by his sudden attention. "Yes, it's mine." But instead of smiling, he frowned. "You need to stow it properly or it could be a safety hazard," he said, his voice sharp. Blood rushed to Taylor's face, and she felt the heat of embarrassment spreading. "I'm sorry, I thought it was fine," she replied softly. Captain Collins crossed his arms, his expression unyielding. It's not fine. If you can't follow the rules, I'll have to ask you to leave the plane. Taylor's heart pounded as if it would burst. Leave the plane? I haven't done anything wrong, she exclaimed, feeling the weight of the other passengers' stares. Some seemed worried, others curious. Taylor could feel their eyes on her and wished she could sink into her seat. Tension began to rise in the cabin, and murmurs spread through the aisles, with some passengers shaking their heads in disbelief. A whirlwind of thoughts rushed through Taylor's mind. She tried to understand what was happening. Was this really just about her bag, or was there something more to it? This can't be happening, she thought, anxiety tightening around her chest. Just then, a loud noise interrupted her thoughts. The plane suddenly jolted again, throwing everyone in their seats. The flight attendants rushed through the cabin to check on the situation, while Captain Collins hurried back to the cockpit. His previous stern demeanor had been replaced by visible concern. Taylor took a deep breath, trying to calm the panic rising in her chest. Maybe he'll forget about me, she hoped, glancing at the other passengers who were still staring at her. As the turbulence subsided, Taylor noticed the elderly black woman sitting next to her. The woman had kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Don't worry, dear," she said softly. "Sometimes they just don't understand." Taylor smiled faintly, grateful but still confused. What did she mean by that? She wondered. The flight continued, but the cold stare of Captain Collins still haunted Taylor's mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was targeting her. Is it because I'm black? She recalled past situations where she had felt similarly, but quickly dismissed the thought. No, it can't be, she reassured herself. He's just a strict captain. As the flight continued, Captain Collins returned to the cabin to check on the passengers. He stopped by Taylor's seat, his face still holding that stern expression. "Make sure you stow your things properly," he warned again, his voice still cold. Taylor nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, I will," she replied, feeling small under his gaze. The flight went on, and Taylor tried to focus on her upcoming visit. She imagined embracing her sister, laughing together, and cherishing their moments together. But each time she thought about it, the captain's warning echoed in her mind. Could he really kick me off the plane? She wondered, fear rising in her chest. Suddenly, the plane shook again, and Captain Collins' voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." Taylor's heart raced again. This flight no longer felt like just another journey that it felt like a nightmare. As the plane settled, Taylor caught sight of Captain Collins again. He was still staring at her from the cockpit, his cold gaze sending a shiver down her spine. Why is he looking at me like that? She thought, the atmosphere around her growing heavier. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, "we'll be there soon." But deep down, she knew that Captain Collins' behavior wasn't just about discipline, that there was something personal about it, and that made her uneasy. Minutes passed, and the cabin seemed to return to normal. Taylor tried to relax, focusing on her breathing. But when she glanced at Captain Collins again, he was still staring at her. What's wrong with him? She wondered, irritation starting to build despite her efforts to maintain a calm facade. The flight continued, but Taylor's mind couldn't settle. Snacks were handed out, and passengers began talking again. Taylor sipped her soda, trying to enjoy the moment. But just as she started to feel at ease, Captain Collins approached her again. "I'm going to need you to pay attention to your behavior," he said in a low but threatening voice. "I won't tolerate any disruptions on this flight." Taylor felt her heart sink. "Disruption? I'm just sitting here," she replied, her voice tense, not caring that others were listening. The tension in the cabin mounted as passengers began to notice the exchange. They whispered among themselves, their faces showing curiosity and concern. Taylor felt like she was on display for everyone to see, and it made her angry. Captain Collins leaned in closer, his face now inches from hers. "If you don't behave properly, I'll have you removed from this flight," he warned, his voice ice cold. Taylor's heart raced, her hands gripping the armrest, her lips pressed tight. "Remove me from the plane? How can you do that?" she asked, disbelief and anger swelling inside her. At that moment, another passenger, a white man sitting behind her, spoke up. "Hey, that's not fair." She hasn't done anything wrong. His voice cut through the tension, and Taylor felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe not everyone agreed with Captain Collins' harsh treatment. Captain Collins turned to face the man, anger flashing in his eyes. "This is my plane. I'll fly it the way I want," he replied, but Taylor could sense the unease in his tone. Other passengers began to whisper among themselves, a few nodding in agreement with the man who had defended her. "Why is he treating her like this?" one whispered. "Ridiculous," another voice chimed in. Taylor felt the weight of their support, and for the first time, she believed there might be people on her side during this flight. But Captain Collins refused to back down. He stood up, glaring at her with a look full of hostility. "I don't need any of your opinions. Just put your stuff away," he ordered, his voice sharp as a knife. Taylor's heart pounded, frustration bubbling up. She couldn't let him bully her. "I won't let him scare me," she told herself, determination igniting within her. As the flight continued, the atmosphere in the cabin began to shift. Passengers exchanged glances, some offering Taylor small, encouraging smiles. She felt their support, and her spirits lifted. "Maybe I can stand up for myself," she thought. Captain Collins returned to the cockpit, and Taylor took a deep breath. "I'm here to enjoy the trip," she reminded herself. "I won't let him ruin it." But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Anxiety clung to Taylor like a shadow, as if things were about to get worse. The roar of the engines pierced her ears as she gripped the armrest, her palms slick with sweat. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, not only from the turbulence but also from the harsh words of Captain Collins that still echoed in her mind, "Get off my plane." His words were as cold as ice, freezing her in place. Taylor glanced around the cabin, noticing the worried faces of the other passengers. They were all like her, uncertain and afraid. In that moment, she didn't feel so alone. Suddenly, the plane tilted sharply, and everyone exhaled in unison. Taylor leaned forward, staring intently at the cockpit, trying to make sense of what was happening. The stern face of Captain Collins appeared through the curtain separating the cabin from the cockpit. He was giving orders, his hands moving quickly as though he could command the plane to follow his every wish. A shiver ran through Taylor's gut. Was he really going to throw her off the flight? Why was this happening? She thought, her gaze fixed on the window, where dark clouds swirled and the ground seemed distant. The plane jerked again, and Taylor saw passengers hurriedly fastening their seatbelts. The overhead compartments rattled, a few bags falling to the floor. Worst-case scenarios flashed through Taylor's mind. Was this just normal turbulence, or was something more serious happening? As the plane stabilized, Captain Collins' voice crackled over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a technical issue. Please remain calm." His tone was still authoritative, but Taylor could hear a hint of anxiety in his voice. She looked at the flight attendants, their faces pale but maintaining professionalism. They moved quickly down the aisle, checking on passengers, their eyes filled with concern. Taylor felt a mixture of worry and anger. How could Captain Collins treat her like that? She was just a passenger, a black woman on a crowded flight. She didn't deserve to be humiliated in front of everyone. A thought crossed her mind that what if she stood up to him? But then she remembered his harsh demeanor earlier. Would standing up for herself only make things worse? Suddenly, the plane lurched violently, and the lights in the cabin flickered. Taylor's heart raced, and she felt like she couldn't breathe. The air around her became heavy, like it could be cut with a knife. Whispers from the passengers filled the air, some staring at her as if she were to blame. "Why is she causing trouble?" a woman's voice said, sharp and judgmental. The words stung like bee stings, and Taylor felt a sharp ache in her chest. She closed her eyes, trying to block them out, wishing she could vanish instantly. "Please keep your belongings in their proper place," Captain Collins' voice echoed over the intercom, firm and commanding. Her face flushed red, her skin feeling tight with humiliation. She hadn't done anything wrong. Why was he singling her out? Was it because she was black? Did he see her as a bigger threat than others? The weight of racial discrimination pressed down on her once again, a burden she was all too familiar with, but now it felt heavier than ever. The plane began descending, and Taylor gripped the armrest tighter, trying to steady herself. The shaking grew stronger, and she saw passengers around her gripping their armrests, their faces tight with tension. Just as the plane stabilized, a flight attendant hurried down the aisle, her face pale. "Everyone, please prepare for an emergency landing." Her words rippled through the cabin like a wave. Taylor's heart thudded in her chest, her breath shallow. Was this going to affect her? Would Captain Collins really throw her off the plane when it landed? "Emergency landing?" she whispered to the middle-aged man sitting next to her, who was also looking around, his face filled with concern. He nodded, his eyes anxious. "It's okay, I think it's a problem with the engine." A cold shiver ran down Taylor's spine. The fear of a plane crash was terrifying, but she was equally terrified of how Captain Collins would treat her when they landed. "Please remain calm," the flight attendant called out, her voice cutting through the fear. "We'll be on the ground soon." The closer they got to the runway, the more Taylor felt the ground beneath her. A mixture of relief and anxiety stirred within her. She just wanted to get off this plane, but what would happen to her once she was on the ground? The plane landed roughly, and Taylor clung to the armrest, feeling the plane skid along the tarmac. The sound of metal scraping against concrete made her shiver. She heard crying, gasps for air from around her. Her heart pounded, but she focused on breathing deeply, concentrating on the safety steps she had seen in the pre-flight video. When the plane finally came to a stop, the cabin was eerily silent, the tension thick in the air. Taylor could feel the adrenaline coursing through her body, her heart racing faster than normal. She looked at the flight attendants, who were moving quickly, instructing passengers to stay seated, but Captain Collins was already heading toward her, his face a mask of stone, filled with rage. "Get off the plane," he yelled, pointing directly at her. Taylor's heart sank, as though every eye on the plane was on her, judging, condemning. She fought back, her voice trembling. "You can't just kick me off like this, I didn't do anything wrong," she said. Captain Collins narrowed his eyes, his voice slicing through the air. "You've been a nuisance this entire flight. I can't accept this." His voice was cold, and Taylor felt the sharp sting of embarrassment, like an old wound that was now bleeding again. Why did he want to force her into the role of the scapegoat? The flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Taylor glanced around and noticed the other passengers starting to whisper, their eyes filled with disbelief. They had witnessed how Captain Collins had treated her, and now it felt like the tide was turning. "Captain," a male passenger stood up and said, "I think you're treating her unfairly. She hasn't done anything wrong." His words were like a fleeting hope in Taylor's heart. Perhaps she wouldn't have to face this alone. But Captain Collins shot a contemptuous look at the man and responded, "You don't know what you're talking about. This is my flight." His voice was still firm, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Taylor could feel the support from the passengers around her, and a surge of strength welled up inside her. She could fight back, but would it make a difference? "Please remain seated until further notice," a flight attendant announced, trying to restore order in the cabin. Taylor's heart raced as she turned to the man who had spoken up in her defense and whispered, "Thank you. I really appreciate it." The man nodded, his eyes full of encouragement. "Don't let him treat you like that. You deserve better." Taylor's heart swelled with gratitude. She felt fortunate to receive such a small act of kindness in a sea of hostility. Just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She quickly took it out and saw a message from Ethan. "What's going on?" After reading it, a wave of anxiety rose in her again. How could she explain this situation? "I'm fine," she quickly replied, but not forgetting to add, "There's an issue on the flight." Before she could hit send, Captain Collins approached her once more. His face hardened as he glared at Taylor. "You need to get off this plane immediately," he shouted. "No!" Taylor yelled, her voice growing stronger, her hand gripping the armrest so tightly her fingers turned white. "You can't just kick me off like this. This is wrong." The passengers around her started murmuring, their eyes wide with surprise. Taylor's determination seemed to make Captain Collins falter slightly, his gaze darting around as if his pride was wavering under the pressure of everyone's stares. Captain Collins' face remained stone cold, devoid of any sympathy or understanding. Every word he uttered was sharp and firm, like storm clouds hanging heavy in the air, ominous. "If you can't follow simple instructions, I'll have no choice but to ask you to leave the plane," he said, each word like a dagger. Taylor felt her cheeks flush, her skin burning with a mixture of anger and shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Why had he singled her out? She looked around and saw passengers shifting in their seats, their eyes fleetingly scanning her like flashes of lightning. Some looked at her with concern, while others seemed to enjoy the spectacle. Heard whispers, and it was clear they were talking about her. "What is she doing?" one passenger whispered. "I don't know, but it seems really unfair," another responded. Taylor felt like she was under a spotlight, while everyone else remained in the shadows, silent. The sensation was suffocating, as if she could barely breathe. All she wanted was to go home. The words of Captain Collins echoed in her mind like the resounding bells of discrimination she had faced before. Suddenly, the PA system crackled, the voice of a flight attendant cutting through the tense air. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts and remain seated." Taylor took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. But the feeling didn't last long as Captain Collins turned toward her again, his face now a mix of irritation and authority. "See? This is why I can't have disruptions. You're making things worse for everyone," he shouted, his voice rising above the noise of the plane's engines. Taylor felt her eyes water, tears starting to stream down her face. How could he say that when she hadn't done anything wrong? "Sorry, Captain," a passenger in the row ahead spoke up, their voice trembling. "I think you're being unfair to her." Taylor's heart soared at the unexpected support. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling a little less alone. But Captain Collins remained unmoved. "This is my flight, and I make the rules," he replied, crossing his arms defiantly. A storm brewed in Taylor's gut, tightening into a knot. She looked around and saw the other passengers shifting in their seats. Some nodded in agreement with the man who had spoken, while others pretended to focus on their phones, avoiding eye contact with the scene. Taylor took another deep breath, trying to soothe the emotional storm inside her. "I am the captain and I set the rules," he shot back, but his voice no longer held the same strength. The flight attendants approached, their faces serious. "Captain, we need to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers," one of the attendants said, her voice firm. Taylor noticed the hesitation in Captain Collins' eyes. Could the situation change? "I don't care about your opinions. This is my flight." Captain Collins yelled again, his face red with anger. Taylor felt a surge of adrenaline course through her, her hands tightening into fists, her resolve unyielding. "Maybe you should care," she retorted. "You don't stand above anyone." Her words rang out, hanging in the air. She could feel the eyes of the passengers around her, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. It seemed that there was empathy from those who had witnessed how he treated her. Taylor felt a wave of satisfaction rising within her as she heard those words. She had stood up for herself, and now others were standing with her. Quiet murmurs of agreement spread through the cabin, reinforcing her determination. Passengers began sharing their own stories, recounting experiences of being treated unfairly by Captain Collins. Some people felt uncomfortable, while others believed they were being unfairly judged. Each story made Taylor's case even more convincing. "You're not the only one who feels that way," the middle-aged man told Captain Collins, shaking his head in disbelief. "You need to rethink how you treat others." Taylor felt her heart race. This was her moment. She turned to Captain Collins, her voice firm. "You think you can bully me because of who I am, but I'm not going to let you. This is wrong and I won't stay silent." Taylor's phone buzzed again, a new message. "Are you okay?" "I'm almost there." Taylor smiled, warmth spreading through her body. She quickly typed back, "I'm okay, you won't believe what just happened." She looked around, seeing the supportive and surprised gazes of the passengers. This moment was truly important. It could change everything. When Ethan arrived at the airport, Taylor felt a wave of relief wash over her. Just as Taylor was about to step off the plane, the door suddenly swung open. A familiar figure appeared, Ethan, her husband. Taylor's heart exploded with emotion, a sense of relief flooding through her, only to be quickly replaced with confusion. Why was he here? What's going on? Ethan's strong voice rang out as he strode confidently into the cabin. Taylor rushed towards him, her voice trembling. They're kicking me off the plane for no reason. Ethan's eyes narrowed with danger as he turned to face Captain Collins. The captain no longer wore the smug arrogance from before but instead seemed flustered. You have no right to treat her like this, Ethan said, his voice calm but resolute. Captain Collins stammered, trying to hold onto what little composure he had left. She's causing trouble. His feeble excuse dissolved into the air as Ethan's cold gaze seemed to slice through his words. The passengers aboard the plane fell silent, watching the scene unfold. Some had taken out their phones to record. A flight attendant approached, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. Taylor felt a glimmer of hope in her heart. Maybe people would see the injustice she had been enduring. Ethan stepped closer to his wife, wrapping his arms around her protectively. My wife has every right to be on this flight. She hasn't caused any problems, he asserted, his voice strong, resonating through the cabin. Captain Collins paled, his confidence slowly dissipating. Ethan pressed forward, his voice growing stronger. You think my wife is causing trouble? That's ridiculous. Taylor felt her heart pounding in her chest as she witnessed the tense scene. The curious looks from the passengers shifted to sympathy. Some shook their heads in disbelief at what was happening, others whispered quietly, clearly siding with her. We should talk privately, Ethan suggested to the captain, his voice calm but cutting. You've humiliated my wife in front of everyone here. Captain Collins crossed his arms over his chest, his lips pressed tightly into an unpleasant line. I haven't humiliated anyone. She's causing a disturbance, and I had to act. The anger in Taylor swelled, spreading through her body. Her chest burned, and her breath quickened. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Causing a disturbance? I've just been sitting here. Why do you always assume black people are the problem? Her words rang out, like a river suddenly freed from its chains. Taylor felt a sense of relief after days of holding it in. Ethan nodded, pride evident in his eyes. Exactly. This is how you treat people. You don't have the right to decide who belongs here based on their skin color. Captain Collins' face briefly flickered, but he quickly regained his cold composure. I don't need to explain myself to you, he snapped, his tone sharp. Just as things seemed on the verge of exploding, the head of security appeared at the plane door. What's going on here? He asked, his tone serious. Taylor felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, someone with authority had arrived to handle the situation. Captain Collins turned to him, his face full of frustration. She's causing trouble. I'll have her removed from the plane. Taylor's heart raced, bracing herself for the worst. Would they side with the captain, or would they see the truth? The head of security looked at Taylor for a moment, then turned to Captain Collins. Can you explain what she's done? He asked, furrowing his brows. Taylor seized the opportunity, her heart pounding in her chest. I haven't done anything wrong, she began, her voice steady. I've followed all the rules. He's just treating me cruelly. She felt every word burn like fire in her heart, the emotion surging. I don't deserve to be treated like this because of the color of my skin. The head of security listened, his eyes never leaving her. His face turned serious. Thank you for sharing. We'll look into this, he said. Taylor looked into his eyes, a spark of understanding flashing there, making her feel hopeful. The tension in the cabin seemed to ease as passengers began nodding in agreement. However, Captain Collins still refused to relent. This is nonsense, he shouted, his anger rising, turning his face red. I'm the captain here, you don't understand. His voice echoed through the cabin, causing some passengers to jump. Captain, this isn't about power, it's about fairness, the head of security responded, his tone firm. If there's a mistake here, we need to address it properly. Taylor could hardly believe her ears. Finally, someone had stood up to the captain. As the head of security continued speaking, Taylor noticed some passengers pulling out their phones, recording everything, capturing what was happening. This was her chance to tell her story, to show that she would not be silenced. The flight attendant turned to her. "We need to ask everyone to remain calm while we handle this situation," she said in a gentle voice, trying to soothe the atmosphere. "Thank you all for your patience." Taylor felt a surge of gratitude for the flight attendants, who were doing their best to maintain order amid the chaos. The head of security stepped back, observing the situation. "We will conduct a brief investigation," he announced. "During this time, we ask all passengers to remain in their seats." Captain Collins' face twisted in anger, but Taylor could clearly see his control slipping away. "You can't do this. I'm the captain," he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. The authority he had once wielded with ease was unraveling, and for the first time, Taylor felt power in her hands. "Fairness must be achieved, Captain," the head of security replied evenly. "And from what I hear, you still have a long way to go to achieve that." A sense of relief washed over Taylor. Maybe, just maybe, justice would be served. Captain Collins looked around, clearly realizing the situation was spiraling out of control. "I'm just following the rules," he stammered, but no one stood with him anymore. Taylor felt strength rising within her. With Ethan by her side, she knew they could stand up against this injustice. As the officer began taking statements from passengers, Taylor's heartbeat began to steady. "This isn't just about me," she thought silently. "It's about everyone. Who's ever faced discrimination?" The atmosphere in the cabin grew tense, but the solidarity among the passengers was undeniable. Captain Collins floundered, his once defiant stance fading as more evidence mounted against him. "I didn't mean to harm anyone," he mumbled, but it was too late. Ethan stood tall, his voice resonant and full of authority. "You can't treat others this way and expect to get away with it." Tears welled up in Taylor's eyes, not just from anger, but from relief. She realized the power of standing up for herself. "This isn't just about this flight," she thought. "It's about creating change." The passengers nodded in agreement, and the mood in the cabin shifted dramatically. As they prepared to board the next flight, Taylor felt the weight lifting from her shoulders. Captain Collins no longer had control. The support from Ethan and the passengers reminded her that she was not alone. Ethan squeezed her hand, filling her with overwhelming gratitude. Captain Collins' face darkened. Trying to hold on to his authority, he shouted, "Everyone is being unreasonable." But the passengers' overwhelming objections drowned him out. The flight attendants exchanged confused glances, unsure of how to proceed. Ethan stepped forward, calm but commanding. Just his presence restored order in the cabin. "I'm the owner of this airline," Ethan declared firmly. The cabin fell silent, every eye fixed on him. Taylor felt her chest swell with pride. Ethan's words echoed through the cramped space, carrying an undeniable weight. Captain Collins wavered, his arrogance fading. "Wait, are you Ethan Thompson?" he stammered, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Taylor's heart raced as murmurs spread through the passengers. More and more recognized the name. "You're the owner of this airline?" Captain Collins repeated, his former authority gone. "That's right," Ethan replied, his tone unwavering. "And you just humiliated my wife without cause. You will be held accountable for your actions." A wave of relief flooded through Taylor's body. Ethan had stepped up to protect her. She knew she wasn't fighting this battle alone. "Sir, I think it's best if you leave the plane," the head flight attendant said sternly. Captain Collins' face turned pale, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. The passengers were now united against him, and their support for Taylor and Ethan was undeniable. "No, I'm the captain. You can't do this to me," he protested, desperation lacing his voice. Ethan took another step forward, his gaze cold and unwavering, locking him in place. "You've lost the trust of the passengers, and that's unforgivable." Scattered applause rang out, each clap affirming the righteousness of the cause. The head flight attendant stepped forward, her gaze steely. "This is a serious matter. We will report your behavior. You're no longer fit to command this flight." Captain Collins stood frozen. His face twisted with anger and humiliation. "This isn't over," he growled, turning to walk away with his head held high, though his defeat was clear. As Captain Collins was escorted off by security, Taylor felt a wave of relief. She had fought back against discrimination, and change had begun. She knew this battle wasn't just hers, that it was for everyone who had ever been treated unjustly because of their skin color. The cabin door closed behind him. Taylor felt a surge of pride and victory course through her body. She knew that the discrimination that had taken place today had been defeated and would no longer be tolerated. The atmosphere in the cabin changed dramatically as applause filled the air. Taylor felt her breath catch in her throat, her chest rising and falling with emotion. Ethan took her hand, squeezing it gently, as if offering a comforting, silent promise. "You didn't do anything wrong, Taylor. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself," he said. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the encouraging faces around her. Her voice cracked with emotion, but she still maintained her strength. "Thank you, everyone, for believing in me," she. The applause continued, like the rhythmic beating of hearts united in support. Taylor felt as though she had stepped into a place where she truly belonged, a sensation she had never known before. "Now, let's continue this flight," Ethan declared, his first smile breaking through the remaining tension. The passengers cheered joyfully, while the flight attendants quickly reassured everyone. The atmosphere in the cabin, once tense, now shifted to one of exhilaration, like a fresh breeze sweeping away the weight. Taylor leaned against Ethan, her breathing gradually returning to normal. Next to him, she felt safe and cherished. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. Ethan looked down, his gaze softening with deep affection. "You're stronger than you think, Taylor. And I'll always be here for you." The announcement for takeoff came over the intercom. As the plane slowly rolled down the runway, Taylor couldn't contain the rush of triumph swelling in her chest. They had faced discrimination together, and they had won. As the plane ascended, piercing through the cloud-covered sky, Taylor felt all the weight in her heart lift. She had stood up for herself, and now she was free to embrace the journey ahead. A journey she knew would not be easy, but with Ethan by her side, she felt strong enough to face any challenge. The applause gradually faded as the plane stabilized in the air. Taylor gazed out the window at the sky, feeling the peace settle into each breath. Her heart was now full of hope and determination. She knew this was just the beginning of her fight against injustice. But now, she no longer feared. With Ethan beside her, she would confront every challenge ahead with courage and unwavering love. "We need to make sure this never happens again," Ethan said, his hand tightening around hers. Taylor smiled, feeling a clear sense of purpose in her heart. "Yes, we will." As the plane soared higher, Taylor looked at the clouds outside the window, realizing that this flight wasn't just a journey, but a stand against discrimination. She would not let her voice be silenced. The world needed to hear their story, and they would make sure it was told. In that moment, Taylor realized her struggle was far from over, but with Ethan by her side and the support of the passengers, she felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. Together, they would fight for justice and equality, ensuring no one would endure what she had gone through today. Taylor sat back in her seat, her gaze directed outside as the plane began to taxi down the runway. The scenery outside was bathed in the golden, orange, and pink hues of sunset, like a beautiful painting. A sense of warmth spread through her, but it couldn't fully mask the lingering tension in her chest. She looked at the sky, realizing that although the flight had started as a nightmare, it had now become an opportunity for her to grow and change. As the plane began to take off, Taylor felt a powerful surge within her, her heart racing as if all the strength within her was igniting. "This is just the beginning," she told herself. She felt an intense determination, as if her wings had spread wide. She was ready to fight for what was right, to protect herself and others like her. The anxiety and hesitation she once felt had now given way to courage and bravery. Taylor was no longer the person she had been yesterday. She had found her voice, and now she would use it to spark change. She felt the strength in her body, as if the whole world had stepped aside, making room for her to walk confidently and fearlessly. With Ethan by her side, she knew they would stand up against discrimination and refuse to let anyone alter the path they were on. The plane continued to climb, and Taylor felt as though her spirit was rising with it, breaking through the clouds of injustice. She was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. A sense of freedom filled her, as if nothing could stop her. She understood that this fight wasn't just hers, that it was for everyone who needed a voice, for those who had been forgotten, oppressed. And in that moment, Taylor felt as if she had already won, not because she had overcome the challenge, but because she had learned to wield her power to change the world around her. When the flight landed, Taylor and Ethan couldn't sit still. A quiet but powerful sense of responsibility overtook her, not allowing her to let go of what had happened. She looked at her husband, her gaze firm. "We have to do something. This can't end like this," she said, her voice resolute. Ethan nodded, understanding the determination in his wife's eyes. "I know," he replied. "We need to act now, to ensure this doesn't happen to us or anyone else." As soon as the plane landed and they stepped out of the airport doors, Taylor began contacting the airline's HR department. She demanded an urgent meeting, not just to address the incident with the captain, but to review the entire staff training on racism and customer respect. "We can't just stop at an apology. There needs to be real change," she asserted over the phone. After discussing with Ethan, they decided to go public with the matter. Taylor demanded the airline issue an official statement, announcing that the captain had been suspended pending investigation. She insisted the statement be released immediately across all media channels to ensure that customers and the public knew the airline would not tolerate discriminatory behavior. "We need to be open and transparent. We can't let actions like this slip by unnoticed," Taylor said, quickly scrolling through the notifications as she prepared to send out a press release. She and Ethan also decided to hold a private meeting with the airline's leadership team. They needed to come up with more concrete solutions to restart the staff training process on respect, ensuring that every employee understands that all passengers, regardless of race, origin, or gender, deserve to be treated fairly and with dignity. A series of training sessions would be reorganized, starting with the employees who have the most direct contact with passengers, such as the flight crew and ground staff. To regain customers' trust, Taylor and Ethan decided to launch a new slogan for the airline: "Fairness for all passengers. Every passenger matters." This slogan would appear on all flight tickets, airport signage, and promotional materials to ensure that customers knew their airline was committed to standing up against racism and injustice. They also wanted to initiate a campaign urging customers to share their experiences, not just praise, but also reflections on discrimination, so they could create a stronger community of passengers who could protect their rights together. Throughout this process, Taylor and Ethan never felt tired or hesitant. Despite the emotional wounds the incident left behind, they knew that their actions would help them rise above and create a fairer world, one that left no space for discrimination. As Taylor and Ethan continued taking concrete actions to address the issue, their efforts quickly gained widespread support from the public and stakeholders. After the press release was issued, many people began to speak out, expressing their support for Taylor and her husband's decisive actions. On social media, the hashtag #StandForJustice quickly became a trend, garnering millions of shares and comments. Former airline customers, who had previously had less than pleasant experiences, also expressed admiration for Taylor's bold decision. They not only praised her courage but also shared their own stories of discrimination they had faced while flying with the airline. These personal stories spread rapidly, creating a wave of community-driven efforts for fairness in the airline industry. Human rights organizations and social activists also took notice and voiced their support for the measures Taylor and Ethan had implemented. This is an important step in the fight against racism in the service industry, and we fully support their decision, a representative from the Equal Justice Initiative shared in a statement. It wasn't just Taylor's airline. Many other businesses and organizations began to reassess their policies and processes for handling customers. Other airlines also started publicly announcing commitments to retrain staff to prevent racism and discrimination in the workplace. Airlines across the world began displaying slogans similar to those of Taylor's airline, reinforcing their commitment to fairness and customer respect. Conversations within the airline industry about this issue became more and more heated. Workshops and training sessions on racism and customer respect were being held everywhere, not only in the airline industry but also across other customer service sectors. The shift in awareness and action was beginning to have an effect, as many companies began implementing stricter policies against racism and unfair behavior. Taylor and Ethan felt that the ripple effect of their actions was no longer confined to a single airline or flight. It was a movement, a wave they had sparked, and now it was spreading globally. With each passing day, they received more messages of support from customers, colleagues, organizations, and individuals. People were starting to realize that the fight against racism wasn't just anyone's battle, it was everyone's. A sense of pride and strength filled Taylor as she saw her community come together. She understood that real change could happen from small actions, from decisive decisions like this one. She smiled, her heart full of the belief that her fight for justice and for everyone's justice would never stop. This story is not only about Taylor's actions but also a reminder of the power of resilience and determination. Have you ever stood up for what's right in the face of adversity? Share your thoughts in the comments that your voice could inspire significant change. If you find the story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with your friends and loved ones to spread the message of fairness, respect, and positive action. Thank you for watching and supporting. Let's make a difference together, step by step, for a world that's just and filled with compassion. Wishing you strength and unwavering resolve. If this story inspires you, be sure to check out more of our videos. Click on the next videos to join us in sharing meaningful stories that can give you motivation and inspiration in life. Thank you for joining us. Keep watching so you don't miss out on valuable content.